given the experience that all of you have enjoyed in the Brazilian market, I'm curious to get your perspectives in terms of how the role of the board has evolved over time. And in particular, what have you observed in terms of the importance of the role that the board plays with respect to issues such as compliance and the importance of ethics and integrity?
It's very clear that in the course of these years, there was a growth, there was a lot of progress in terms of governance and the development of boards of directors. I can give you some examples. A few years ago, let's say 10 years ago, the only committee that existed in terms of a board of directors was not a board of directors, but an audit committee. So we saw this maturity of the boards of directors in Brazil, and the companies then started to become more and more concerned about the management of the risk management, especially the big companies. They set up various committees. So now there are, in many companies, there is like a separation between the audit committee and the risk management and compliance committee. We also witnessed in the last few years, and research studies show this, that committees, for example, soft skills committees, this was something that was not part of the boards of directors agenda here in Brazil. And now we have seen that in the last few years, the second biggest number of committees after audit committees are now the people committees, so the ones that deal with the soft skills. And in Brazil, with the anti-corruption law, the companies began to become even more concerned. This I'm referring to the anti-corruption law, which was enacted in 2013. As from then, Brazilian companies began to show more and more concern about compliance, and they were very they were very particular about following, about establishing controls and putting good practices, and they also instituted codes of ethics and codes of behavior, and this is now holds true in most companies. So it became very clear, I've been following corporate governance for 20 years, and I was able to witness this entire evolution that has happened here in Brazil. So this is my comment in this respect. I agree with what Luisa said. I think the track record of boards of directors shows that even though the whole issue has become more complex, but there has been this evolution, and the dynamics entail the various committees. And so this is one of the main issues. But I would say that when this historical track record, and I've also kept track of corporate governance for at least 25 years, ever since that the Brazilian stock market instituted the new market, and I was quite active in creating the rules of this Novo Mercado, which is part of the Brazilian Stock Exchange. And this evolution was very interesting because the boards of directors became supervisory entities and not consulting entities. Traditionally in Brazil, the boards were of a consulting nature. However, the great challenge, I envision three major challenges within this context of complexity. First is the supervision of the boards of directors is something very complex and very difficult, because there is a lot of conflicts of interest between supervision and management, in addition to the natural conflicts of interests that come up anyway. The second relevant aspect is that within this process of digital innovation, the company's operations have become more and more complex, highly challenging, and with risks that are quite difficult of being established. So this is a huge challenge. And the third aspect which from my perspective, is that today the demands of the new market stakeholders, these demands are enormous and they're growing. I'm referring to issues related to the environment, data protection, personal data protection, technological innovation, and the fact that companies are becoming more and more international. So we have all these huge challenges with this new setup that Luisa has just mentioned and how things have evolved. In my opinion, what I have seen, in addition, of course, I agree with Luisa and Petrus, what I have seen is an evolution in the repertoire of board members. There's a higher capacity building of the members in the sense that they're now able to deal with issues. So the board members now have a broader sort of background in this respect, less focused on specific issues. So this broadening of the repertoire of individual board members to me seems as being something very relevant. And obviously, as Petrus mentioned, the appearance of everything linked to ESG and the social license to operate, which is in some way is competing in a sense with the legal permits and licenses. This makes board of directors, they have the need of being prepared of dealing with players that influence decision-making process, especially the stakeholders. And so this broadening of service of the supervision and governance and decision-making to me is something that is extremely relevant. And this has become even more relevant in the last 10 years. And and especially this has become very crucial in this pandemic. I would like to add something which is something important. In the last few years, the boards of directors started to evaluate the board as a whole and the members of the board themselves. And as a result, the professionals, this has made professionals want to be on the same level as their peers, and they want them to be as active. They want to have more and more experience and knowledge. So when you are evaluating boards of directors, this has raised the bar. And so more and more, there are people, professionals, highly qualified professionals acting as members of the board.
It seems that the role of the board member in Brazil has become, as Roberto said, much broader than the role was historically. And it seems to me that the role has become much more complex and raises much more potential liability, even from a legal perspective, for board members. And I'm curious for your perspective within that context. How does a board member today think about how best to ensure that he or she is receiving the type of information or gaining as much visibility as they can into the management or operation of the company to get comfortable or satisfied with how the company is being managed? And here I mean specifically, of course, from a compliance or ethics perspective.
I see here two things. First, the entry upon the governance playing field, the externality map that comes to the fore. Externalities is more than risk. Normally, we manage risk, but focusing on the field of negative externalities, but has just a short capacity of seeing the positive externalities. And the map of externalities is an amplification of risk management, which is obviously much needed, continues to be needed. Within this increasing of the field of externalities, risks become to have some opposition with the externalities. There are positives and negative externalities influencing the models that we use for our business, and we have to have that in our board. But also, we have the moral liabilities that many times are not part of the structure of the legal risks. Carbon, for instance, in the last 10 years, it was just moral issue. It was not adequate for a company to emit lots of carbon to the atmosphere. Today, carbon is a legal risk, a legal liability. So this is a moral externality for one system. We have now a different aspect, and the role of the advisors that has to learn more about the moral externalities that come before what is going to be a legal externality. So a total different type of risk is something that the boards have to deal with. They have to learn to deal with that. It's very complicated because moral externalities are mainly indicated due to a large group of stakeholders. It's different from the moral aspect because you have there a legal reference. So the relationship with a huge group of stakeholders makes that the way in which the boards have to deal with the moral license, this has to be put within the assessments of the board. Roberto, I loved your observations. This is a concern that is becoming very important. The problem of externalities is serious, is relevant, and I would say that it exerts today a function similar to what soft law had in the past. There we had some rules without legal enforcement, but they became very important. Good governance, social aspects, and other themes. They all became very important. So today, externalities are going within this dimension of soft law, although soft law is still very important in governance. To speak about that, I would like to remind you that the World Economic Forum, before the pandemic, we had the forum, not now. But if we check the reports from the World Economic Forum in terms of cooperative governance, we're going to see that we have the major risks that are presented by the main heads of the big companies are normally connected with environmental and technological externalities, like cybersecurity, like the problems of social disruptions, pollution, and systemic crises that come from the financial area. Those are new externalities, and we have to deal with them too. So those risks are very important. We have to take them in consideration. And cooperative governance no longer has the traditional characteristics that became seen from the 50s last century. At that time, we had the vision of function, management and supervision, oversight. Today, governance is a system. So answering you, Jeff, this is a system. So the best warranty that a person may have for the risks for the company and for a person, they have to trust the check and balances of the systems. What are the checks and balances? I would like to mention first, quality and the honesty of the members of the board, the quality of the main groups that influence the company, stockholders, um, clients, suppliers. And another aspect that is very relevant is the structuring of the culture of the company. Recent research from Callow University, for instance, came to a very curious result. The survival of good companies is dependent on the segmentation, on the internal culture of the company, ESG, for instance, and the environmental issues for governance. So for me, I believe that this is the best thing that can be used as a warranty for the company and for the members of the board. I don't know if you agree with me. And Eloisa answers, yes, the governance evolved. Now it's a system of governance within the externalities that you're mentioning. I would also speak about fraud, evasion, environmental harms, the violation of human rights, the traceability of the supply chain, cybernetic safety, and one that is very important is the reputation of the company. So whenever I'm asked to pertain to a board, I pay attention in the 9 issues here, most of them at least. I have to check on them before accepting the possibility of participating in a board. I'm going to provoke you a little bit. For instance, an athlete, an actor, somebody that does not behave well in terms of a public and the society. This person has the possibility of contaminating the company, giving it bad reputation, bad image. This is a very simple thing. It's something that we speak a lot about that. And reputation of a marketing message. Who is the person that deals with marketing in the company? In the past, it was operational. Now it's strategical. It's very important. This is a very complex issue, I believe, because management itself doesn't like to have this oversight. They think this is just management. But if we look to the whole, we have there a strategic issue. I do not know if Roberto deals with that or Eloisa. Like a starlet or a singer or somebody could be noxious to the company. Well, those persons that represent the company represent the image of the company. So we see how many times a soccer player, a singer has involvement in a scandal. When the scandal bursts, he loses a lot and the reputation of the company is tied to this boy or girl that were representing the company. It's very important. I agree with you. I also agree, but besides that, there is another aspect too. The accountability of communication as a whole. What's the message you send into the world? Well, today is every time more important to care about communication. The choice of the person that is going to represent the company is extremely important. But what are you communicating? Is a true message? Is not a true message? For instance, the induction of food for children, the role of communication as an education item. This is a accountability, very relevant with reputational risks and also other risks that are extremely important. So within the field of ESG, the component of quality, accountability in communication are both very important in this world where we had a very fluid communication, very speedy communication. And another point here in terms of reputation, Eloisa, you told us about the attention and supervision and oversight of the whole chain of the company. Agribusiness, buying from a small producer. And we are here speaking about more than 2 million suppliers of products for commodities, companies in the area of feeding. So we had small farms, small producers in the whole country to supply the market in the country. So who coordinates all that, offering that to the market? Traceability, the new technologies of traceability are fundamental. And here we had a very complicated issue related to human rights. How much information about the life of those small producers is being invaded by the rich producers. So the quantity of information that you must have nowadays means that you have to introduce yourself within the life of those small producers. You have to break their area of comfort. The boards have to think about that. Those are ambiguities that we have, but we have to think about it. There are risks from one side, risks to another side. You have to choose which risk you're going to take, up to where you're going to do, because the company has to get in the life of people. I would also say, Roberto, that today, this complexity of problems are the most relevant evidence for us to say that cooperative governance, lato sensu, is no longer part of economy, but macro one. So the confusion between systemic risks and entrepreneurial risks is too huge. I would like to remind you of my experience at Petrobras. You know, Petrobras had a fall so important that impacted the whole situation in Brazil. I went to one of the most important cities in the logistics of Petrobras, and there I saw the unemployment, of the vacancies, of drug people all around. You know, the deterioration of the whole city. When I went there, I saw that the losses of a company so important as Petrobras has a dramatic consequence for society. Macro and micro is very important. You have to check on them. Compliance has a social activity beyond the walls of the company. So I believe that what you said was very relevant and interesting. So everything is connected with social themes. I would add also the importance of dissemination of the compliance culture within the whole productive chain. Very important to align everything. You have to be closer to the companies that supply to us, talking to the professionals of each area, guaranteeing transparency and the knowledge of the ethical positions of the company. The dissemination of compliance and ethical culture is very important.